VenomousStare back with another edition of the Venomous Classic series, a series in which I take a look back at classic StarCraft II games, games that had a interesting impact on the metagame, games that were interesting within the context of the game's history, and games that I thought needed to be cataloged because you never know which e-celebrity is going to lose their mind next and delete their YouTube channel without warning. I'm VenomousStare. I've been casting StarCraft 2 since about mid-2013, and I love to catalog the historically important games within StarCraft 2. And today we have a matchup that if you were to just look purely at what people have typed into search engines of, oh, I want to see what X player versus X player looks like, this is one of the highest ones ever requested. This is the brother battle, Day 9 versus Tasteless. Now, if you don't know who either of these people are, you must be living under a rock, because these are two of the most important people in the history of StarCraft 2. Day 9 and Tasteless are two biological brothers, Sean Day 9 Plott and Nick Tasteless Plott. Both of them have been incredibly involved in StarCraft 2 for well over a decade. Nick Tasteless Plott was best known for his commentating of GSL and aggressive Protoss play in Brood War, a very funny, charismatic guy. Sean Day 9 Plott was best known for his incredibly informative Day 9 Daily series, in which he would take a look at different pro gamer replays, do prep work with them, and really dig deep into them as far as timings and strategies and tactics go to try to educate his viewer. Pretty much everyone who's ever played even a little StarCraft has heard of Day 9 and really likes him. And Tasteless is the co-commentator of GSL along with Artosis, so everyone's heard of Tasteless too. These are two absolutely beloved guys in the StarCraft 2 scene. And it's really worth noting that neither one of them are really that active in the competitive StarCraft 2 scene and never were. Both of them really stuck to casting. Both of them were very private players. Day 9 actually had significantly more tournament success in Brood War than Tasteless did. As you see Tasteless get a Reaper out here and harass some drones. Back in this time, Reaper wasn't standard, it was more of like a cutesy Q thing you did, and since they are in close positions, the Reaper got there very quickly. And I know the video seems sort of like slow and framey. It's because it was from the first half of 2010, and it took to about 2012 for XSplit to be consistently available for everyone and people to figure out how to effectively capture gameplay. So it's not because I have my codecs screwed up or my OBS settings screwed up or I'm doing something wrong. The replay looks a little clunky because it's so old and because of the source recording. This game is so old, the Xel'Naga Tower thumbnail on the map is bugged out to a white box. This is how old these games are. This is the Wings of Liberty beta. Wings of Liberty came out in mid-2010. I was in high school at that time. I could barely drive. These games were before that, and what's funny is they spawned in close positions. Another funny thing I want to point out is that both players are playing random. This is probably the most significant game in StarCraft 2 history where both of the players were playing random. Now, it's worth noting that even though this was a invite-only tournament that happened in the beta, this was the very first round of the tournament. And this is a common thing for the Plott brothers to meet in the first round of a big tournament. There is a famous series in WCG 2004, I believe, where Sean Day 9 Plott has to face his brother Tasteless in the opening round of this tournament, and both of them have been practicing so hard and training so hard and really busting their ass, and they drove such a long way to try to qualify. And this was WCG USA, so all the best Americans had to play each other, and then the top three basically got to go to the big WCG where all of the top tier countries players will be facing each other. It's always funny to me when I see a StarCraft 2 VOD so old, the units in the bunker are yellow and not white. Look at that. And because WCG, for whatever reason, just seated the people in the bracket in alphabetical order, the two plots had to face each other in the first round, which was just so corny. So Sean Day 9 Plott and Nick Tasteless Plott had to face each other, and Day 9 beat Tasteless 2-0, and afterwards they had sort of a tearful embrace where Sean Day 9 Plott basically was like, okay, I'm gonna win this. Like, I beat you in the first round. I can't fucking go on and lose to like a 5 pool the next game. Like, I gotta nut up and like really win this because I'm fighting for both me and my brother. And this was something that, Jesus fucking Christ, this was something that was very important to Day 9, and he discussed in the Day 9 Daily number 100. And we can see here that Day 9 is actually going to get mutas out before there are turrets everywhere. And what's funny about these absurdly old like beta tier games is they sort of play out like Brood War a lot of the times. Like, people had been playing Brood War for like 8, 9, 10 years, and they were just sort of transitioning into applying the things that they learned in Brood War to StarCraft 2. They were just straight up doing the Brood War builds. So this is like basically just 2-hatch Muta on Lost Temple, and notice that Day 9 intelligently has Overlords creep dropping both of the cliffs. It's funny because you could see Lost Temple games up into several months into the game's release and you wouldn't see this adequately. Keep in mind, both of these guys are playing random, but they're Brood War mains, where Day 9 was a macro Zerg and Tasteless was an aggressive Protoss. So it's sort of funny that they get ZVT on Lost Temple of all maps, which is just ludicrously Terran favored. Now, this is the beta of StarCraft 2, so the map pools like Lost Temple with close positions enabled, Metalopolis with close positions enabled, no neutral ramp depot at either map or on any map. Then you have Steps of War, Delta Quadrant, Kulos Ravine. This map pool was a fucking joke for Zerg. It was so bad for Zerg. It was so Terran favored. So it's funny that the first map they get in a random versus random series between two guys that grew up spending like every minute together is a Zerg versus Terran on like the best Terran map ever, pretty much in StarCraft 2 history. If your life was on the line and someone was walking up to you and saying, alright, TVZ, two guys are going to fight it out, just assume they're equal skill, one's Terran, one's Zerg, what map do you want it on and what positions? And you need the Terran to win to survive. You would probably say close positions, Lost Temple. Because I've done a lot of Lost Temple casts. Probably more casts on Lost Temple, the novelty, since it's been out of the map pool, out of any StarCraft content creator ever. And we know how powerful the cliff is. It overlooks both the gold base and the natural. And the corner bases is an island, which is bad for Zerg. So it really doesn't get any more difficult than Lost Temple for Zerg, which is part of what makes Artosis' GSL win on Lost Temple so incredible. Another funny thing, you can look in the top left, and if you're a veteran viewer and you've paid close attention, you can see the difference in some of the upgrades for like the thumbnails for upgrades, or even for buildings and different stuff on this game. It's just so much different in the beta. They've really changed so much. As the tower is cleared off there, and we can see Tasteless is just massing a massive amount of bio. I'm sort of scared for Day 9 here that Tasteless could just do a massive push. The tricky thing about close positions is that they can just be at your front door in a moment's notice. And look at this. Back in this time, even if you were the biggest YouTuber in the world, YouTube videos could only be like 10 minutes long. So macro games in StarCraft had to be uploaded in multiple parts. It's sort of funny to me to look back at StarCraft from 2010 Legacy of the Void and look back at all this sort of Legacy of the Void, we're out here in 2020, right? Well, I've been watching the game for almost a decade, and even if I wasn't there the day the beta came out, I went back and looked at a bunch of these old VODs, which many people never did. And to me, it's just so entertaining to see how a lot of these players try to fight under these very disadvantageous positions, and how different that StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 are, but how the early Zerg matchups in the early days of the game were. And here we see a bunch of speed banes coming in, and Day 9, because the game just came out, doesn't really realize the importance of just move commanding those around to the Marines, so he crashes most of the banes into Marauders, but Tasteless had been powering up for like 12 minutes, so it doesn't matter. There are a lot of little funny things you can notice about the beta if you have a sharp eye, other than just like the terrible thumbnails for the upgrades. For instance, there's no game clock. Just like StarCraft Brood War, there was no clock within the game. It took several patches for them to come out with a clock. And I almost think it's funny to revisit beta games just to point out things like this and examine how far the game has moved. Because with a lot of people, they sort of focus on like, oh, the strats are outdated, or like, what's the point of old games? To me, these old historical games are super interesting. So here we see some Hydra Bane coming out. And remember, this is the beta, so people had like no freaking idea how to play, to the point where you had people like Tasteless and Day 9 and TLO that were playing true random just to figure out what even race they wanted to pick. And we see another instance of yellow unit indicators coming up instead of white. And with the Terran on 2 base and the Zerg teching into 4 base, we see a double drop here for the Terran player. And this flew right across an Overlord path, so Day 9 should be able to defend this. And I know it looks a little bit laggy and chunky, and this is just part of cataloging old VODs, as sometimes they're not as smooth as you might think. It's better for there to be a somewhat chunky, choppy VOD than there is to be never a VOD at all, remember that. Or just a battle report. So Tasteless flies over to the natural, and Day 9 immediately snipes the drop. Remember, Day 9 saw that with an Overlord. One of the best ways you can take advantage of a Terran player trying to be aggressive with the double drop is stomp out the drop as soon as it arrives without it doing any damage, because the Terran player is pretty much guaranteed to lose like 20 supply. So if you see a drop coming and you can set up for it and defend it without taking any damage, it's very hard on the Terran, because oftentimes, especially in times like this, whenever the Terran's really far behind, that drop really needs to do damage and the Terran is relying on it. We can see here that Day 9 is creep dropping the normal main that you would take in close positions, as well as the island base that the Terran would take in close positions. So even for a beta player, Day 9 is doing very well in keeping his shit together. One thing that we don't really see from Day 9 though is creep spread from Queens. Remember, for a very long time, Queens were only seen as a necessity unit that you just had to have one of per hatch, because they were just so much worse offensively and had a lot less utility because of how much worse the attacks were. But anyway, again, we see another somewhat sloppy engagement where Day 9 runs his Banelings into Marauders, but it doesn't matter. So here, after Day 9 takes the first game on close positions, lost tempo, we're going to see the second game, and that Asian guy was HD StarCraft, who was like a moderately talented caster who was really big in the early days of the game. It's really funny if you just look back at StarCraft 2, not just at its bare bones history of the players who won the GSL and the top foreigners and all this different stuff. If you just look at it sort of as if you just take like multiple steps back as a StarCraft fan and look at it more as like a pop culture phenomenon, it's really interesting to look back at StarCraft and see like, yeah, like around like 2010 YouTube was starting to get truly popular. And I know for a lot of people that might sound absurd, like especially if you're like 16 or below, because then it's like, well, YouTube's always been super popular. YouTube's always been like the de facto. And although like YouTube since like 2007 or 2008, it was like the de facto video sharing platform, there were people on like Dailymotion and there weren't established communities on YouTube as much. It was way more of like the Wild Wild West, and what you had was people like HD Starcraft and Diggity Starcraft and Husky Starcraft, who's a spineless coward. They would upload these casted videos of StarCraft games on YouTube, and because there was just there was a really big demand of StarCraft games, but your average casual fan wasn't gonna like boot up your like Korean stream at 360p at 5 a.m. So there was a big demand for just like easily digestible like 5 to 30-minute games on YouTube, and people like HD and Husky, who like never really put in the hours talent-wise as far as trying to be a pro gamer or like making guides or getting good at the game or doing anything like this, they were sort of thrusted into temporary fame, as we see again Day 9 rolling into Zerg, his best race, and this time Tasteless actually getting Protoss, which is his best race. This is Blistering Sands. This is a pretty bad map for Zerg, but in general it's just sort of like a claustrophobic choke pointy map, whereas like a lot of the other maps were like straight up like just inherently bad for Zerg, whereas this one's just like more of a rush map in general. And we can see, this isn't me, but like at the bottom, like the fucking like VidMe or Daily Motion or like whatever file, like BitYL or like what's that other one? File share, I can't remember what it's called. Blip TV, like that was like a Blip TV scrubber or whatever at the bottom. But like I said earlier, you straight up couldn't get StarCraft games in one sitting as far as a file goes. All these video hosting websites would make you break them up into 10-minute increments. So people have always wanted to see Day 9 versus Tasteless, not only because they're brothers, but because at the beginning of StarCraft 2, both of them got way more private, and neither of them really ever tried to be pro gamers. Like in Brood War, both Tasteless and Day 9 would consistently try to get as good as they could before the WCG America tournament and try to win, and they were basically trying to be pro gamers and do damage. And Day 9 was always way better at it than Tasteless. But to me, it's just interesting to note that unfortunately, like, both of these guys had to play each other because of poor formatting in WCG, and like none of those WCG Brood War VODs are available, or I'd be all over casting those. And not even just like the Day 9 versus Tasteless ones, I mean like Idra vs In Control, Idra vs Ortosis, Idra vs G5. So all those like Brood War fucking WCG USA VODs are pretty much like lost in the wind. The best you can do is go to Wikipedia and just look at who won, as we see Tasteless going for a 4-gate here but with no proxy pylon. But it's just interesting to note that even though this was Wings of Liberty beta and wasn't that much further along, and people still really can't record in HD 60 FPS that effectively, this was really like the last significant game that Day 9 and Tasteless played against each other, and really it's like the last significant game that they played, period. Because if you just look at like on-stage matches or like significant matches that either of these guys play, when is like the next one that you look at? It's like these weird one-off holiday events where they'll play like and I'm digging through like every fucking esoteric memory bank I have, not just like straight up like MLG or IPL like competition. There was a like a show match that Day 9 played on State of the Game that was like 2v2 with Artosis, and then Tasteless played some show matches in that StarCraft remastered launch event, and that's it. Like, those are the only fucking matches that either of these guys have played in like the last decade, or in all of StarCraft 2 history, and both of them used to be Brood War pro gamers. And we can see here that Tasteless is aggressing upon Day 9's base, and it's looking very dire because he got the infamous force field on the ramp. So day 9 is restricted to 1 base production here, and there's no Ravager to break that, and the Hydrogen is at the natural, and day 9 can't even mineral click his drones. But a few Hydras get past, and it looks like Tasteless is going to do some more damage here. He's going to polish off the drones, and this is just a straight up 4 warp gate rush, which at this time passed for like cutting edge strategy. And day 9 saying, good game. Was that, and he's probably going to ask like a 4 gate or like 1 gas, straight up warp gate after Robo, or did you cancel it? I canceled the Robo, GG. So something that I missed a little bit there, Tasteless showed a Robo and then just went straight up 4 gate. Trying to find it here. It's way harder to pick up on things like this when you're not observing, when you're just watching a VOD, because like, watching the second time around, like, did you see him click on the Robo? Did you see him like go to 1 or 2 to show the Zerg's vision? Like, do you see a Robo here? Like, I don't see a fucking Robo, and I don't know if it's because I've been casting and I'm trying to talk or what, but regardless, like, if it didn't really matter because day 9 didn't see a Robo. Alright, so we're on to game 3 with the series tied 2-2, or 1-1 rather. Like, day 9 didn't see a natural, so it didn't really matter like whether he fucking saw a Robo or not. And oh my god, they're playing Steps of War. And remember, it's random versus random, so it's like an absolute grab bag of what could happen. Which is hilarious because on this map it's like a total shit show. So it's funny, especially because on the first map it's Terran vs Zerg on close positions Metalopolis. Tasteless has a huge advantage and day 9 wins. And then we see a game on Blistering Sands, which like is sort of bad for Zerg, but I mean it's not like laughable like the other maps. And day 9 just loses to a straight up warp gate push. And then now we have the smallest map ever in competitive StarCraft 2 play. This is a map that always emphasized rush play and was just notoriously bad for Zerg. This was like pretty much, if you look at like death sentences for Zerg as far as maps go, it's like Lost Temple and Steps of War are both pretty much like as bad as it gets. But they're playing random, so it's just very funny that like in this case Tasteless got Zerg and day 9 got Terran, because if you're viewing it from a more far out perspective, Zerg was at a big disadvantage at this time, and if day 9 had picked Zerg, like he would have in Brood War, he would have been in a really tough spot. But another interesting thing about this series is that I pointed out that Tasteless and day 9 didn't play like any significant tournaments throughout the StarCraft 2 history other than these. And if you, some of you might be saying, well, like, of course not, they were casters. Well, like, Dan Artosis Stemkowski, even though he was a full-time caster, still tried to be a pro gamer at the beginning of this game's life, to the point where he was competing in the early GSLs and still practicing a lot. Whereas day 9 and Tasteless, I don't really think we're doing that so much. And here we see a speedling expand here for Tasteless, as taking hatchery first on this map, it's just suicide. Because honestly, a Terran could be doing nearly any build, like quick factory, quick Hellion, quick whatever, like 2 racks, Banshee, quick tank, and if they see you're going hatch first, it's just laughably easy for them to just send their opening Marine and SCV across the map. And remember, salvage gives you 100 back, so you could play little bunker games with Zerg for virtually no cost at all. And that's something that I think a lot of people who look back and watch these VODs don't really estimate appropriately or appreciate, is just how lethal the one bunker against Zerg is. And it's more really like the threat of it than like, oh, we got a bunker up at my natural, you know, I'm gonna have to make a bunch of lings now, I'm way behind. he's teching up and making more workers and expanding while I'm making links for one fucking bunker that can just be evacuated and salvaged. It was almost more of the threat. It was like, oh, he's making a bunker, he's threatening a bunker, and even if I stop it, oh well, great, I pulled a bunch of drones and made a bunch of lings and he just cancelled and he's ahead anyway. So that's one thing that you have to consider when you view these old games, is it's not just a matter of how much damage something does, it's a matter of the threat of something. And we can see a little bit of one base roach play coming out here for Tasteless, and Tasteless is on virtually no workers. It's very brutal to be behind workers to the Terran and TVZ, especially when you're trying to expand. And Tasteless is going to do a little bit of a roach play here, and Day 9 has just played ludicrously greedy. He's going for Hellions on Steps of War, which I actually think is bad. Hellions is more of like a macro, like space saving play that keeps the other person honest, and Steps of War is so damn small that a lot of the times you build the Hellions to scout all ins and figure out what's coming. But for Day 9, just to basically go like 4 Hellions and nothing else, he's trying to go 4 Hellions into an expansion as he only has a barracks. And even though roaches are really bad, when there's no infantry, no bunker, no wall in, no air units, like there's literally nothing to defend these freaking roaches for Day 9. Day 9 did like a really greedy macro build that you would do on cross positions Metalopolis, and Tasteless was basically like, it's Steps of War, lol. And then Day 9 says, I made the wrong add-on at the racks. So if we just consider what would have happened, it would have been a tech lab, he would have rushed at a Marauder, and it probably would have still been too late. He wouldn't have had stem or slow or a bunker, and it's Steps of War, so Tasteless probably just keeps reinforcing and is going to win. And obviously Day 9 GG's here and leaves. And he says, I don't think it would have mattered though, which is just basically what I said. It wouldn't have mattered. So he was trying to go Hellion into Marauder, and you can note here, right here, there's a CC. It's really foolish to try to early expand in any regard on Steps of War. And that's even if you do like an in-base CC. And the reason for that is, and this is pretty simple if you think about it, your opponent thinks, even if they're Zerg, your opponent thinks you're going to cheese, so they themselves are either going to open with early game units to stay safe, and then have the units to push across the map and be aggressive, or they themselves are going to cheese. So it's just sort of, it's, unless you know your opponent is like going to fast expand, it's really shitty to try to fast expand on Steps of War. And we can see here, if Day 9 had an extra factory or a couple extra barracks or a bunker, this roach play like is really not very strong and shouldn't work. The only way it does work is if what happened in this game happens. You walk across the most laughably short rush distance map after going gas pool first, after they don't make a bunker, after they don't make infantry units, after they don't make a starport, after they expand, and after they open Hellion. Like, you can see how hard it was for Zerg, because like 5 different things had to go right for Tasteless this game for him to take down his brother. So Tasteless earns a little bit of victory points here in the HDH Invitational, and this was Day 9 versus Tasteless. They never really played ever again, and both of them were very private in their StarCraft 2 accounts, never really releasing replay packs or showing off their games on stream. Have a good one, sub for more.